Hi and welcome to my water cooling video, and this is kind of a tips and tricks for beginners of water cooling. And my system might look a bit outdated compared to the newer systems, but I've been water cooling for over 5 years, so I'm going to try to tell you what to try in water cooling from my point of view. Okay, so I'm just going to go over the components of the water cooling. So here is the CPU block, and there's another CPU block right here. So most computers, like the computer you'll probably be running, will only have one CPU block. But this one's a dual Xeon, so it's got two CPU blocks, 1, 2. And here's my graphics card, and my graphics card is currently not being water cooled. Here's the pump, and I'm not using, and here's the radiator, and there's fans on the radiator, blowing air through the radiator, and I have no reservoir. So I'm going to talk about probably a way to build a water cooling system and why you should build a water cooling system, what are the benefits, and what are the considerations to getting into water cooling. So the new system of water cooling is an all-in-one system where it's got the pump and the block and the radiator all in a loop, and it's a closed loop system. So I have not tried that, so I'm not going to be talking about those systems. So I'm going to be talking about the old school way to do it, where you have a dedicated pump and a separate radiator and a separate pump and a separate cooler. So, and I'm going to try to break down the costs too. So I'm using a Swiftech SMP655 pump. It's got a pump stand on it, so that's why it's got this little stand on it, and it's a very industrial sized pump. Like it's the larger pump you're going to see, and I would start with this size pump because these are very reliable pumps. So if you can get one of these pumps, I think you'll have it for many years, because you can use it with your new system. Like every time you build a new computer, you can use the same pump. And so the other thing too is that I would get a big power supply, like 750 watt power supply or more, and dedicate one of the power leads to the pump, because the pump uses a lot of power. So you don't want to daisy chain. Like I had a problem because I daisy chained one of the power leads. I used it on the pump, and then I used it on a hard drive or something, and then the system would not even start. So you have to have one of the power leads to the pump, and that's the only thing drawing power from that lead that's going into your power supply. So I'm going to talk about ways you can save money as well, and how to build a reliable system. So, and where you should spend money and where you shouldn't spend money. Okay? So where you should spend money is on expensive CPU blocks. Get like EK all metal, or get like the best blocks you can, like from a reputable company. And I'm using 2 EK block all metal blocks, and they're quite expensive. I think they're over $100 each. But these ones, they fit LGA 2011, and they fit a lot of different, so I've been able to use the blocks for a few years. on different systems. They're like compatible with different motherboards and different CPUs. So that's a consideration when you're starting out water cooling. Is I know that the brand new chips are really big chips now, so I might have to change out my blocks in a few years to the larger size blocks, cooling blocks. So one thing not to scrimp cheap out on is the radiator, and get an all copper radiator like a Swiftech solid copper radiator, which this one I've had for years. So it's critical to spend money on good blocks like all copper or all solid, good quality metal blocks, or don't cheap out and buy crappy blocks, and don't cheap out and buy like an aluminum radiator, because if you use a mixed metal system, especially with water, like distilled water, like I'm using distilled water, if you used a mixed metal system like an aluminum radiator or a tin, stay away from tin, stay away from aluminum, and use high quality fittings too. Use copper fittings. Everything copper or high quality, and not cheap tin or cheap aluminum, and you'll have less problems with your system. Trust me on that, because over time you can have chemical reactions with the distilled water, and that can eat away the weaker metal. So if it's aluminum is the weaker metal, it'll be eaten away. So you can pull your system apart in a year or something, and you'll find out that, like, if you have cheap blocks, they'll be all starting to deteriorate inside. And if you got an aluminum radiator, you'll notice that it'll start corroding, and you'll see it'll be bubbling up on the outside. So stay away from aluminum radiators. If you're going to build like a component liquid cooled system like this, rather than a closed loop system, go with all copper radiators and all copper blocks, and stuff like that. And also the seals on the blocks, they sometimes go after a couple of years, so you have to keep an eye on the seals that are on the cooling blocks. So here's another way you can save money, and that is that I'm just using copper. It's like 16 or 18 gauge wire. I think it's 16 gauge wire, so copper 16 gauge wire, and I'm using those to clamp. I'm just tying it around to hold the tubing onto the fittings with that, and that seems to be doing a good job, and that costs like next to nothing, for that wire. It's really cheap. That's a way you can save money. So yeah, and so I would spend money on this with like a large water pump like this. I would save money on that by buying a nice big water pump, copper radiator, and copper blocks for your system. And you don't need a reservoir, despite what they tell you. You don't need a reservoir. You can get away if you have limited space in your PC. So there's so much ways you can save money in liquid cooling. You don't have to buy a case that's only for liquid cooling. Like, this is a massive case. It's an extended ATX case, and so yeah, if you're not really super into aesthetics, just buy any large PC case. I like to use a vertical case now, instead of like I used another size, but I like the vertical cases now for building. And well, I'm going to tell you about the benefits. The benefits for water cooling, there's You only really need distilled water. That's another way you can save money. Is you only really need distilled water to fill your system. And I'll talk about another thing is the tubing. There's a company called Tygon, and for tubing, and that's what I use. You can buy it on eBay and things like that. So this is like I'm using high temperature Tygon tubing, and I did my whole system in it, and you can see online they sell a whole bunch of Tygon tubing. So, and also I'm not using the really fat tubing. I'm just using, I don't know what the size is. It's about a 3/4 inch maybe tubing. So yeah, and so yeah, these are all. And also you have to have, it's really important, another thing that's really important is the direction of the flow of liquid in your pump, in your system. So on these pumps, they have little arrows, so it's going, the distilled water is going out of the top of this pump, it's going into one block, out of the block, into this block, out of the block. Here's my fill tube here, into the radiator, and then out of the radiator, and then into the pump. So that's the direction. And here's the fill tube right here. So yeah, I don't even use a reservoir anymore, I just use the fill tube. And you can get these, the fitting for the fill tube. It's like a little, it's a little screw top. So that's the fitting for the fill tube right there. So yeah, so basically, why would you build a water cooling system? Well, once you build the water cooling system, if you have it set up in your office or your bedroom or wherever you have it set up, it's going to be super quiet. You're going to notice because you're going to barely hear your computer. It's going to be so quiet, and that is like a, you know, over time that's a huge benefit to have a quiet system. And if you want to run like a music studio or something, it's almost like if you're doing recording videos or doing music recording, it's really a good idea to have it. The lower temperatures are going to make your system happy too. So your everything, the components and everything like that are going to be running optimally at a cooler temperature. So, for example, I just completely redid my system, and I have like an 8-core system, and they're all running in the 30s, and I think that, you know, it's going to only go up to 40 degrees at the most, maybe 40s, even on a hot day. Okay, I have these EK blocks. Another thing is when you open your EK block, I have 2 EK blocks, full metal blocks, a Supreme Copper, and this one, I don't know what this one's called. But anyways, inside, if you open up the EK blocks, they have like a channel system, and they have a little filter or a little metal plate, and that little metal plate really reduces the flow and concentrates the flow of the water in the metal in the CPU block. And I highly advise for you to take those metal plates out of your EK block, because they're just going to cause problems. They might give you like a few degrees cooler temperature, but in the end, if your block gets any kind of, like, the channels will eventually get filled with crap. They have these like metal channels inside of a copper block, CPU block, and eventually over time crap builds up in those channels, and then if you have that plate in the EK block plate, that can cause a lot of problems. So right away, the block will operate fine without that. So just take that out. I'm not cooling. Water cooling has changed quite a bit over the years, and now for graphics card they usually have custom coolers, like custom water blocks for graphics card, and it's a big money maker because you know, every time you get a new graphics card you need a new cooler, right, for that card. So but basically, so I'm not even cooling my graphics card with water cooling. So it's I have a Quadro card, a P2000, and as you can see, it's upside down, like the fan is facing down. So I have this tiny little Arctic cooling fan that it's just sitting on top of there. It's not even bolted to anything, it's just sitting on top of my card. And it cools my card by about 10 degrees. So yeah, it cools the card. So and it's nice and quiet too. So that's my solution. Yeah, so right now I'm running dual coolers, cooling 2 CPUs. So yeah, those are, so the other thing you can do is, and I don't really suggest you do this, like if you may want to not try this, but this is what I do. And these CPUs have automatic throttling, so that if they overheat, the CPU will shut down your computer. So if you feel like really adventurous, what you can do is when you're setting up your cooling system, your water cooling system, don't even attach the block. See, take the block off and don't have it attached to the motherboard. So that way you can sort of dry test your water pump system, your loop, and if there's any leaks, they're not going to leak on the motherboard because you're testing it out of the case. So I'll just take these blocks off. I'll have the block right here, and I'll have this block right here, and I'll run the pump. And then if there's any leaks, it won't get any on any of the components, and that's why you can pre-test. You can pre-test your loop before you actually set it up. Here's the fill tube, and how do you get your system going? Once you've hooked everything up, you open this fill tube, you unscrew it, and you fill that with distilled water. And you fill it right up to the top with distilled water. You make your fill tube long so it'll hold like quite a bit of water, and you fill it right up to the top there. And then you can run your pump. And when you first start your computer, it'll suck water into the system, and then you find it'll stop pumping because it doesn't have enough water in the system. A number of things. Don't spend money on a fancy water cooling case. You could even get a used extended ATX case, or just a good case, a large size case. My suggestion is to go with aluminum cases because they're really nice. Some of the aluminum cases are really nice. For example, this is an all aluminum case, and it's my favorite case that I've ever owned. So yeah, I would get an aluminum case to build a computer, and just check the size of the motherboard, like it is an ETX motherboard or EATX motherboard. This is an EATX motherboard. So these are a couple tips. Is that if you plan on doing water cooling for a bunch of years, I would not buy the closed loop system. I would stay away from those because the pumps have to be really weak on those, and the weaker the pump and the smaller the pump, the more prone it probably is to breaking. Because I don't understand how, like a little tiny pump that you see in those fully enclosed systems, like I don't understand how that would last, like under serious conditions. So, and if you want a dual loop too, it's like, just for the future of your system, and if you want to expand your system in the future, I would save your money and see if you can get one of these big Swiftech pumps to MCP 655. I've got 2 of them now because some guy was selling off his water cooling parts, and I got 2 MCP 655s, and I got one of those EK blocks from him, and I got a few other things. So yeah, what I would spend money on is if you're new to water cooling, and so don't spend money on fancy cases. That's just a waste of money. Don't spend money on a reservoir because you don't need a reservoir. You can just use a fill tube. Don't spend money on all that straight tubing garbage. I don't even understand why people buy straight tubing systems now. They're making these straight tubing systems, and there's just more connections, and so there's more places where the water can leak out. So it's just for me, I think it's just a ridiculous way to build a system. So go with this flexible hose system, and I use Tygon. So look up Tygon tubing and see if you can get some on eBay. They're like lab tubing, and this is like high temperature. This kinks quite easily. That's why I have it set up like this, because this Tygon tubing can kink up a little bit. It's a little bit more prone to kinking, and but I just got a whole bunch of it on eBay. So I literally have like 30 feet of it. So yeah, so spend money on a good pump, MCP 6055 or so. Get good fittings, get like brass or copper fittings. I would get copper everything. Stay away from cheap tin stuff. Get good copper blocks. Get a good copper radiator. Get a double radiator. I would go with the double radiator. Of course, you need to cool the radiator, so I have a couple of fans that are plugged into the motherboard that are just running at low speed, so you can barely hear them. Get a large power supply, like 750 watt power supply or so. If you're going to do water cooling, that's a must-have situation. I've got like a little plastic for the. If you're going to do the fill tube system, you need like a little splitter. See this like little splitter at the bottom of the screen? So you need this little splitter fitting. It's just made out of plastic. It's just kind of like a T splitter. So you need that for your fill tube, and then you need your fill tube, the top fill tube, which is, it'll have a little screw in. Here's a fill tube, an extra fill tube I have that's not connected, so you can see what it is. It just sticks into your hose, and then the top of it unscrews, and that's where you put the water in. You only need distilled water. Don't worry about putting chemicals in. I've tried chemicals before, that's fine, but distilled water works perfectly fine. So yeah, that's a cheap way to make a system that'll last for. And I'm not kidding when I say that I had this system running for 3 years, and I'm not joking on this. I had this system running for 3 years with this MCP 655 pump before I checked it. And once I finally did check it, I had a cheaper water block and it started to corrode inside, and I had a cheaper aluminum radiator which started to erode. So my system was still working fine when I took it apart after 3 years, but the temperatures weren't that cool anymore. So I put my old copper radiator back in, and I got a new EK block. So this is the new EK block. And again, I took out the plastic fittings in the EK block. So anyways, I hope that helps somebody. And yeah, it's a really good solid system. So I think I'm trying to think how much you would spend on that system. So I think everything would cost, just for the water cooling components, I think you'd be looking at around $350 to $450 for water cooling parts. But then again, you can use that with different systems. So anyways, hope you enjoyed that. Thanks for watching.